Hey guys, today we are going to do a black on black low fire glazing technique. So we're going to start with black underglaze. I really like this Amco velvet underglaze. And this is velour black, which is lovely. And a nice soft fluffy brush. And I start with the bottom. So underglaze can go all over the pot. You don't have to avoid the base. So I'm going to go ahead and paint it on everywhere, and I'm going to give it 3 nice coats. Now, I'd like to use underglaze on like a hard leather hard clay. Some people like to use it on greenware. Some people like to use it on bisque. I like to do it on like a hard leather hard because it is stronger than bone dry, but it is also saves me an extra firing if I put it on before bisque. So just my process. So I'm going to get 3 coats on here. We don't really have to worry about brush strokes like you would with paint. It's just, since I'm putting it on really heavy, it's all just going to be matte black. It's not going to show brush strokes. So just throwing it on, making sure that there's no clay showing through. So three good coats. Then I am going to start getting my little paper pieces ready. So this is my design. I chose to do sort of wheat meets barley sort of little thing because I was thinking, okay, the Native Americans were heavily influenced by nature. So how has nature influenced me? And I grew up on a farm and we grow a lot of barley and wheat and things. So that's what I did. And I just made one because I've got a tiny little pot. But I'm just starting to get that ready. So it's cut out and I'm just starting to get it damp with a damp sponge. Then I'm going to flip it over now since it's dry and put 3 coats of underglaze on the inside. Just make sure that it's dry before you flip it or the underglaze will just lift right off because it's not bisque. So it's not going to soak in quite as easy. In between coats, I am letting it dry. I just cut that out of the video, but you should let it dry in between coats. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of push around the wet glaze. All right, so then I'm going to flip it back over very gently because we don't want to knock that underglaze off of the rim. And I should say normally I would fire it at this point. So normally I would put this in for a bisque fire. Because I'm doing the video, I'm going to kind of skip that and we're going to rush ahead to clear glaze, but I would do a bisque here. And then after it's all dry, the underglaze is dry or bisqued, then you're going to use a clear glaze. And again, I like the Amico low fire clear. Works pretty well. This is a low fire clay. And I'm going to glaze the underside. Now I like to glaze the foot on a banding wheel because then I don't have to use wax. I can just kind of brace my dominant hand the way that I did when I cut the rim earlier and just draw a line around the outside slowly by turning the pot on the banding wheel. And then I keep the glaze off the bottom, but I end up with a nice clean line as well. Okay, so I'll just put that on. And again, we want to do 3 coats of the clear glaze and make sure that you let each coat dry in between. Takes a little bit longer to dry for mine because it's leather hard, but it will soak it right up if you do bisque and it'll dry fast. So I'm just trying to keep that line nice and neat while I get a nice solid first coat. So just bracing my dominant hand with my paintbrush and turning the banding wheel, letting the banding wheel kind of do the work for me. All right, just gonna speed up the video a bit here. But it's 3 coats. 3 coats of clear glaze on the outside. Not on the bottom though, the clear glaze does have glass in it, so it will fuse to your kiln shelf if you get it on the bottom. So this is the second coat. All All right, now that it's dry on the outside, I'm going to very gently pick it up. There's a lot of glaze thickness here now that hasn't been fired, so I'm being very gentle. Don't want to chip anything. And setting it back down so that I can do the top. Now, this is kind of the fun part. So I'm going to use my stencil, which should be damp. I decided that it wasn't as damp as I wanted it to be, so I'm actually going to re-wet it a little bit. You want it to be flexible, not like stiff paper. And it just wasn't quite as damp as I wanted it to be. It wasn't quite as flexible as I wanted. So I'm just going to use a damp sponge and just soak the paper a little bit more. This is just regular printer paper, computer paper. It's nothing fancy. You don't want it dripping wet because you don't want it to completely resaturate the glaze, but just wet. And again, this would work great on bisque. You wouldn't have to worry too much about re-wetting that black glaze if it was bisque. But I've got it wet so that it's flexible, and I'm just going to set it on my pot where I want it. You could do this on the outside as well if you wanted to. You have to put the paper on before the clear glaze. And then I'm going to use my damp sponge again and just kind of help set it into place. The paper will stick on the clay. So the water just helps to make it form to the shape that you want, and it helps to make it stick. Not dripping though, just damp. Just make sure there's no bubbles or any edges that are still lifted up. Then we're going to use our clear glaze and 3 coats again. But when you paint over the stencil, you want to start from the center of the stencil and paint outward. That way your brush doesn't catch the edge of your stencil as you're making your brush strokes. We're going to paint from the center of the paper out towards the edges. So I'm just going to paint over my stencil first. And then after the stencil is covered, then you can just glaze normally. And you want to put 3 coats of clear glaze on. Every time you paint over top of that stencil, though, just be mindful you don't want to lift the stencil off with your brush by mistake. So paint from the inside of the stencil outward. And we're putting 3 coats on. I love this Amico glaze. It's really good at self-leveling, so we're not worrying about brush strokes. Just getting 3 coats. And again, I did let it dry in between. I just clipped that time out of the video. So clear glaze, for anybody that doesn't know, clear glaze is dyed so that you can see it, but it will fire when it's done. It's just pink for the moment. Then I'm going to use a tool to help me find the end of that stencil, and I'm just going to pull it off. I do this before the clear glaze is completely dry so that it doesn't chip. All right, and there it is. That's kind of the magic. So when it's fired, the area that was underneath the stencil will stay matte, and the clear glaze will fire shiny. Okay, guys, have fun.